Given that I do a lot of videos on mythology, philosophy, and their inclusion in video games, I admit it is borderline criminal that I've only done one video on the Shin Megami Tensei franchise. And even then, it was on Persona, which, let's be honest, has kind of become its own separate thing. The Shin Megami Tensei franchise would be the digital equivalent of heroin for me. And believe me, I've wanted to hook these games to my veins for a while now. But the reason I haven't is, well, it's very simple. There's too many of them. I didn't know where to start. Do I start with what seems to be the most popular one, Nocturne? Is it true that Devil Survivor supposedly has the better story? I didn't know. If I was going to do a video on an SMT game, I would have to choose wisely because these games can take a lot of time to get through, and I have to maintain regular video output. Who knows? Maybe the one I chose wouldn't make for a good video. Thankfully though, I found a solution to this conundrum in a very interesting way. It's a bit of a personal story. Recently, I remembered a conversation that my wife and I had when we first started dating. We are both very passionate gamers, and when we thought we understood each other's tastes well enough, we both put together lists of games that we thought the other would enjoy, games the other hadn't played yet. We both had so many games to recommend to each other, so to save on time, we limited ourselves to 5 choices. Her top recommendations to me were as follows: Final Fantasy X, Nier Replicant, Eternal Darkness, Lost Odyssey, and Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga. When I remembered us putting together these lists, I went to my wife and asked her why she chose Digital Devil Saga out of all the other SMT games, and she played a lot of them. Essentially, she recommended it to me because she knew about my channel and my tendency to do videos on deep stories in video games. Out of all the SMT games, she felt that while Digital Devil Saga might not have the best story in the franchise, it was the deepest. Having recently finished playing both Digital Devil Saga 1 and 2, I can definitely see where she's coming from. If the Japanese made The Matrix, and then unloaded a dump truck of references to Eastern mythology and philosophy on top of it, you would get Digital Devil Saga. Granted, The Matrix made a lot of the same references, but they were subtle about it. Whereas DDS includes these references with the subtlety of a screaming baby in a movie theater. And by the way, that's no criticism. In fact, the blatancy of the references might be this game's greatest strength. See, when I noticed these references, I felt compelled to study their importance to their respective religions, as well as why they might have been put at certain points in the story. In doing so, I uncovered a hidden motive from the game's authors. It seems to me that their intention was to create characters that dealt with some of the most complicated philosophical problems, and then see how these religions and their philosophies addressed them. Better yet, the intention seemed to be to find the common elements among these religions in order to create a philosophy with universal appeal. One that not only helped the characters successfully transcend their suffering, but maybe even the gamer could too. Even if you're an agnostic like myself or an atheist, one can appreciate Digital Devil Saga's religious-based philosophy as a sort of poetry, a tribute to the strength of the human will, rather than as a system based on faith. For this reason, Digital Devil Saga might not be the greatest Shin Megami Tensei game, but it might be the deepest, and I'm going to show all of you just how deep it goes. Before I do that, I will quickly address those who are weary of spoilers. The first half of this video will provide a non-spoiler explanation and analysis, and then I will provide ample warning before I dive into the spoiler-filled second half. And finally, because of this game's limited availability, I will leave a link to a PC emulation tutorial in the description box below. Now, let's begin. The first Digital Devil Saga takes place in a post-apocalyptic wasteland known as the Junkyard. Within the Junkyard exist 6 cities, each controlled by a separate tribe. All tribes are engaged in perpetual violent conflict with one another, vying for greater control. The only neutral space where leaders of the tribes can meet for negotiation is the tower that exists in the center of the junkyard, a place known as the Karma Temple. We play as Surf, the leader of the Embryon tribe. At the beginning of the game, we find Surf and his comrades engaged in battle with the Vanguard tribe over a mysterious egg-shaped artifact. At a random point during the battle, a beam of light shoots down from the heavens and decimates said egg. Released from within are spirits which fly through the bodies of the fighters. When this happens, everybody present begins to shapeshift into demonic creatures. The intensity of this ordeal makes everybody pass out, and when they wake up, they find strange markings on their bodies. They also find a woman named Sarah in a crater where the egg once stood. The Embryon decide to retrieve Sarah and return to base. They try to get answers from Sarah about who she is and where she came from, but she proclaims that she has no memory regarding anything aside from her name. Soon after this interrogation, each of the tribes receive summons from the Karma Temple. When they arrive there, an unknown godlike being known as Angel explains what transpired during the previous battle. The hatching of the egg released something known as the Atma virus, something which not only causes people to transform into demons, but forces them to eat other demons in order to satiate their hunger. Of course, the natural consequence of this will not only be more intense warfare, but inevitably, every denizen of the junkyard will need to feed on each other until only one is left. However, Angel promises a reprieve to the tribe that is left standing. They will ascend to Nirvana and no longer have to live in the junkyard. Lastly, Angel notes that the last tribe standing will also need to bring Sarah with them to the top of the central tower. But before anybody can ask who Sarah is and where she came from, Angel disappears. For the rest of the game, Surf and the Embryon travel through the various settlements, battling the other tribes in the hopes that they will be the ones left standing, so they may not only achieve Nirvana, but receive answers regarding the identities of Sarah and Angel. Now, where most games would take this premise and use it to encourage gamers to engage in a mindless battle for superiority, Digital Devil Saga introduces a complicating factor. There is a symptom of the Atma virus that the characters learn about as the story progresses. It gifted, or some might say cursed, Surf and his team with consciousness. Prior to Atma, the denizens of the junkyard were unconscious beings who never questioned where they were before the junkyard, how they got there, and why they were engaged in perpetual war. Now that they have consciousness, they are not only stuck with these questions, they become conscious of the pain that comes from the absence of clear answers. That confusion makes them conscious of emotions like resentment and sadness. Those emotions lead them to despair, and that despair is compounded by this new instinct to eat other demons, which simultaneously educates them about what disgust is. While this type of existential breakdown is not unfamiliar in fiction, the unique setting and the sudden introduction of consciousness puts these familiar questions in a new light. I found that this new framing made me empathize with the character's pain to an unprecedented degree, so much so that I found myself wanting to answer the questions they were struggling with. This was my impetus to look at the game's various references to religion to see if they contained sustaining wisdom. Though the game does provide some direct solutions to the main character's struggles, and I will explain what those are, I want to take a bit of time to focus on the greater number of indirect answers to these questions. And these indirect answers lie in the game's limitless Eastern mythological symbolism. By far, the biggest source of inspiration for Digital Devil Saga comes from Hindu mythology, and the most obvious concept that DDS uses from that tradition is probably the chakra. In case you don't know what a chakra is, the general Hinduist belief is that there are 7 vortexes of energy inside the human body. Through meditation and other yogic methods, one can optimally channel one's prana, or life force, through these chakras for superior emotional and physical well-being. With Kundalini Yoga, it is believed that the highest expression of one's prana, the Kundalini, resides in the lowest chakra, and that by having it ascend up the spine towards the highest chakra, one can achieve enlightenment. Though this likely went over most Westerners' heads who played Digital Devil Saga, the journey of the embryons follows the Kundalini pathway. We start in the city named after the lowest chakra, Muladhara, and conclude our journey in the area named after the highest chakra, Sahasrara, the place where the winning tribe achieves nirvana. It should be noted, by the way, that nirvana is not the ultimate goal of Hinduism, but of Buddhism. But don't worry, this is a discrepancy that I will address in greater detail later. Aside from nirvana, the game references a couple of other holy prizes from Eastern tradition. The first of the two I want to mention is the name of a room inside the area named after the final chakra. The name of that room is the Sea of Milk. In Hindu mythology, it is believed that the gods worked together for thousands of years to churn this sea in order to produce the elixir of eternal life, what they called Amrita. Though said room doesn't contain the Amrita, which is good because that would make you insanely OP, putting it in an area at the end of a long journey is symbolically appropriate. It's even more appropriate that this room is located in the basement of Sahasrara, because the Sea of Milk was often equated with the unconscious mind of the individual and the universe. Whether it is through meditation and yoga, or the gods with their churning, both methods involve a contention with the unconscious to derive the ultimate goal from within. With meditation, it's enlightenment and eternal liberation. With the gods, it was Amrita. As for the second example, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that because this is a JRPG, there will inevitably be a final boss. And before you fight this boss, you can go back to other parts of the game to level up your stats. When the game gives you the option to fight the last boss, if you say no, this will unlock a series of bosses in the previous areas of the game. 4 of these bosses are the 4 great mythological creatures of Chinese mythology: the Black Tortoise, the Azure Dragon, the Vermilion Bird, and the White Tiger. By defeating these 4 bosses, you unlock a secret final boss in the form of the Yellow Dragon. Now, according to Chinese mythology, the Yellow Dragon was equated with the Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, who, according to legend, either transformed into a yellow dragon or rode a yellow dragon to heaven at the end of his lifetime. While the Yellow Dragon of DDS does not grant eternal life, the skills granted from his defeat are the most expensive and arguably the most powerful. Unlike the references to the chakras and the Sea of Milk, the journey to the Yellow Dragon has a philosophical element with practical applicability. By defeating powerful demons, especially the most powerful demon in the Yellow Dragon, you can reap certain rewards by importing your save into Digital Devil Saga 2, specifically stat bonuses. In other words, by sacrificing early on, you won't have to suffer as much later. It's a classic moral lesson, but the gameplay gives that old lesson a newfound appreciation. For the remainder of this video, I do want to focus in on the more practical philosophy that DDS provides, but unfortunately, doing so requires diving into spoiler territory for both the ending of DDS 1 and the majority of DDS 2. If you don't mind having all the key points of the story spoiled for you, then feel free to continue. So, at the end of DDS 1, Surf and the Embryon achieved Nirvana. Their disappearance into the light and the subsequent credit roll makes us believe that they achieved a happy ending. Unfortunately, a post-credit scene ruins this early victory. Here, we see Surf standing amidst a new post-apocalyptic wasteland, with corpses seemingly made of stone strewn before him, and an eclipsed sun hanging above. Early in Digital Devil Saga 2, we learn that this new wasteland is the real world, and the junkyard was a computer program. Surf and the Embryon, along with all the tribes, are artificial intelligences placed inside the junkyard program to battle each other. This was done by the military of an unspecified country to determine which AI had the best combat stats. That way, the data could be used to make computer chips that would be augmented onto real-life soldiers, and in turn make them better fighters. As for who created the junkyard program, well, it was Sarah. However, she did not originally create the junkyard for this reason. To understand the original reason, we need to go all the way back to the beginning of Sarah's known history. In the real world, she was recruited by an organization known as the Karma Society for her unique telepathic abilities. They used her abilities to, no joke, communicate with and study God. Yes, the God with a capital G, who, in this game's universe, is located in the sun. For Sarah, communicating with God was a mentally taxing exercise, especially given how often the Karma Society employed her talents. To deal with this, Sarah created the original junkyard program, but at that time, it wasn't a military application. Before that, it was a digital paradise that Sarah could upload her consciousness to in order to relax. On top of this, she uploaded versions of people she knew from the real world to keep her company. One of these people was the person at the head of the Karma Society's study of God, Surf Sheffield. She gave his digital counterpart a kind and hard-working personality because this was the person she understood the real Surf to be. She was so impressed by Surf's qualities that she eventually fell in love with him. However, she soon learned that her initial appraisal of Surf's personality was incorrect. Truthfully, Surf was manipulating her feelings in order to gain better results during the tests. Ultimately, he only cared about understanding God in order to selfishly reap the power that would come from doing so. When Sarah learned this, the sadness she felt was simultaneously felt by God, due to their telepathic link. As revenge for this transgression, God turned the sun black, destroying the world and causing all humans that fell under the sun's gaze into stone. There were members of the Karma Society that survived. One of them was a woman named Jenna Angel, the chief technical director at the Karma Society, as well as the mother and father of Sarah. This is because she's intersex, because that's how that works apparently. She wanted to find a way to shield the remaining humans from the effects of the Black Sun. Thus, she created the Atma virus, and to test it, she inserted it into the newly redesigned Junkyard program to use on the AI. Of course, because the Atma was created to be used on humans who had consciousness, it would necessarily make unconscious AI programs conscious. When the transfer of the virus was complete, she entered the program and ordered the various tribes to fight to the death. Let us summarize Surf and the Embryon's situation. Not only are the real world and the digital world hellscapes of unending suffering, there is seemingly no way to escape them. Worse yet, the fact that they are computer programs arguably negates any possibility of transcendence in the real world, because one might assume, if you're religious, that only natural beings can transcend. Given this state of affairs, I would not blame the Embryon for any ideas surrounding self-termination, to find Nirvana's promise of nothingness in death rather than transcendence. However, Digital Devil Saga 2 not only addresses these unique philosophical conundrums, but surprisingly offers a hopeful pathway forward for the Embryon and humanity. To start, remember what I said before. Nirvana is the ultimate goal of Buddhism, not Hinduism. The ultimate goal of Hinduism is moksha. To the initiate, these two concepts seem to be the same, but there is in fact a major difference. Nirvana is transcendence by negating existence, while moksha is transcendence by embracing existence, becoming one with it. As for how one does this in Hinduism, the answer lies in the name of the virus that gifted the embryon consciousness. Atma is a reference to a concept in Hinduism known as Atman Brahman. Atman refers to the individual, while Brahman is the name given to the ultimate reality, which is virtually another name for the highest god of Hinduism. Ideally, through yoga, meditation, and other spiritual practices, the Atman can elevate their consciousness to the same level as Brahman, to the point where they are indistinguishable from one another. To borrow a phrase from Persona, I am thou, and thou art I. In the world of Digital Devil Saga, the Atman Brahman concept applies equally to natural and artificial consciousness. This is why the embryon are able to pass from the digital world into the real world. If humans can transcend this reality to a higher plane, why not the embryon into the real world? But it doesn't stop there. Throughout Digital Devil Saga 2, we see the embryon, specifically Surf and Sarah, fulfill the promise of Atman Brahman. They fight their way through the Karma Society to a device that allows them to transfer themselves to the actual sun, so they can converse with Brahman itself, to ask if it can restore the Earth and mankind back to their original state. Before I address what happens there, however, I must mention one final reference to Hindu mythology, probably the coolest of them all. Right before Surf and Sarah get to Brahman, the two of them combine into a single being named Seraph. The unity of male and female in a single being is a concept that shows up often in Hinduism. Supposedly, it's a reflection of Brahman's true nature, which is the unity of opposite elements. What could better represent that than the unity of male and female? And what would be more appropriate for the Atman to do than to reflect Brahman's true nature within themselves? Giving the name Seraph to the Atman who is about to unify with Brahman is especially appropriate because in Judeo-Christian mythology, the Seraph was the highest form of angel in the heavenly hierarchy, ranked just below God. The writers for this game knew exactly what they were doing. When Seraph reaches Brahman, they, along with avatars of their former allies, engage in battle to prove their worth, to prove that they are worthy of unifying with Brahman. When they inevitably succeed, Brahman restores the world to its former state and grants Seraph ultimate godhood. Freed of any limit, Seraph is left to explore the splendor of the universe, while people on Earth live happily ever after. Though fantastical and based in religion, the tale of Digital Devil Saga retains its beauty and depth by appealing to issues that plague people from all types of backgrounds. What is the purpose of consciousness? How does one make sense of the world suffering? The answers to these and other questions, regardless of one's belief system, is at least in part to find the strength from within, to recognize that higher ideal and collectively work uphill towards it. And Digital Devil Saga is a beautiful tribute to that timeless effort. Okay, so that's one down. Or two down, technically. Which Shin Megami Tensei game should I do next? Let me know what you would like to see most in the comment section below. Make sure to give this video a like if you liked it. It's free and helps me out a lot. Also, if you like the type of in-depth analysis that I do here and want to help ensure its continued production, please consider supporting me on Patreon, Subscribestar, or by joining my YouTube members section. I will put links to all of those in the description box below. Thanks guys, and until next time, I want to remind you as always and as per usual, stay yellow.